All right, let's talk about one of the most misunderstood parts of video. Frame rate, resolution, and all those camera settings that seem really confusing at first, but make a huge difference on how your footage looks. By the end of this chapter, you're gonna know exactly what settings to use for cinematic video, slow motion, YouTube uploads, and more. Frame rate is simply how many images or frames your camera captures every second. 24 FPS is 24 photos every second. 60 FPS is 60 photos per second. 120 FPS is 120 pictures per second, and it's super smooth and perfect for slow motion. Now, 24 frames per second is the cinematic standard. It's what almost all Hollywood movies use, and it feels really natural to the eye, and it adds a bit of motion blur that makes things look more like film. If you want that cinematic look, you really want to shoot in 24 frames per second. 30 frames per second is a little smoother, which is great for YouTube tutorials or talking head content like this. 60 frames per second is super crisp. It's great for slow motion if you want to slow it down in editing. Here's a pro tip. Only use slow motion if your editing software lets you slow down higher frame rates, like turning 60 frames per second into 24 frames per second for buttery slow motion. Resolution is how much detail your video has. Think of it like how many pixels are packed into the image. 1080p, which is full HD, high definition, is most common. This is a lot easier to edit. 4K, which is ultra sharp, which gives you room to crop in. Then there's 6K and 8K. These are massive files, but they're great if you want flexibility, but it's definitely overkill if you're just starting out. I personally shoot most of my videos in 4K because it gives me room to crop in, reframe, and I get to deliver really crisp, professional looking footage. But here's the thing, if you're just starting out, 1080p is more than enough. It saves a lot of space and it looks great. Plus it's easier on your computer while editing. And here's the thing, you don't need to chase resolution. Even Hollywood has shot amazing films in 2K. Focus on story and composition, not the spec sheet. Okay, so let's get into the deeper stuff, but don't worry, I'm gonna make it really simple. First, there's bitrate. Bitrate is how much data your camera records every second. A higher bitrate equals better quality, but also bigger files. Think of it like this. If your camera is painting an image, bitrate is how many brush strokes it gets to use. Then there's bit depth, like 10-bit or 8-bit. This is one of those terms that sounds super techy, but here's what it really means. Bit depth is how many shades of color your camera can capture. 8-bit is 16 million colors. 10-bit has over 1 billion colors. Now the Nikon Z8 that I shoot with records internally in 10-bit, which means I get smoother gradients and way more color flexibility when I'm grading, and there's less chance of banding in the sky or skin tones. But here's the deal. Starting out, 8-bit still looks amazing, and we're gonna cover color grading later in the course, and I'll show you how bit depth makes a big difference then. So let's talk about codecs. And don't worry, I'm not gonna turn this into a science lecture, but a codec is basically just a way of compressing your video so it's manageable. There's H.264 and H.265. These are the most common, and they're great if you're uploading to YouTube. Then there's ProRes and BRAW. These are higher quality, but they're bigger files and they're better for editing. .mp4 and .mov, these are file formats, and they're not the same as a codec. Now, if your camera gives you the option to shoot in H.264 or H.265, use it for most projects. It's efficient and it's super easy to edit. If you're doing serious color grading or professional work, you may want a higher end codec like ProRes, but we're gonna dive deeper into that when we get into post-production. So if your camera has a high efficiency setting, it's probably using H.265. This one saves space, but it might slow down older computers during editing. So which settings should you use? Now, if you're not sure where to start, this is what I recommend. If you're doing talking head or YouTube videos, I would say use 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second. Personally, I'm using 24 frames per second. I would shoot on 1080p or 4K if you have some money for hard drive space or you really want that high quality for zooming in. Shoot on H.264. 8-bit is totally fine, but 10-bit if you have it. If you're shooting slow motion or action, I would shoot on 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second. Now remember, you need to interpret your footage back into 24 frames per second in your editor. Now if you really want the cinematic look, you definitely want to shoot on 24 frames per second so you can get that slight motion blur, but you need to combine it with another setting, and we're going to talk about shutter settings next. So now, hopefully you understand frame rates, resolution, bit depth, and the other stuff that used to sound confusing and you didn't need a tech degree to get it. Next up, we're going to talk about how to control the look of your footage using shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. We call that the exposure triangle. If this helped you even a little, hit subscribe. I've got a full playlist walking you through every step of becoming a confident filmmaker, and if you want my free downloadable gear guide, the link is right below.